For those of you who don't know me, my name is Emma Brown and I'm the founder of Whimble. We are a care tech platform based here in Ottawa, and our goal is to make personal care more accessible. So we connect people who need short-term, medium-term, urgent care with experience, very thoroughly vetted attendance on demand. We also partner with event organizers like music festivals and major sporting events to ensure that their on site accessibility accommodations include attendance services, personal care, which really helps make these public spaces and events more inclusive. So, speaking of events, I'm really excited to welcome someone from one of Canada's biggest music festivals to today's conversation. I don't know how many people know like the Whimble origin story, but Ottawa Bluesfest was definitely a critical component of that. And they were our first major event partner way back in 2023. And we've been honored to partner with them ever since for both Ottawa Bluesfest and CityFolk Festival here in Ottawa. So yeah, so excited to chat with Keanna today. Keanna Louis-Charles is passionate about serving her community and working towards a more accessible space for all. She has worked with local nonprofits to support her community, currently as the volunteer and community engagement manager with Ottawa Bluesfest and CityFolk Festival. She is a musician, advocate, educator, acquiring her bachelor's degree in performance music, saxophone studies. Everyone has these cool talents, and I keep forgetting to tell people to bring. Well, last month we had a singer or a musician as well, and I keep
Yeah.
we should have a little performance section
Oh, we
built into
should.
these moving forward. Just a little solo, quick solo. And Keanna also didn't include this in the bio she sent us, but I know because I follow her on Instagram that she's also a badass actor and model, which is so cool. Very broad range of skills, and she's amazing at what she does with the festivals. So yeah, thank you so much for being here with us today, Keanna. Did I miss anything?
No, that's everything. Thank you, Emma and Wimble. I am so excited to be here.
Yay. Okay, so maybe we'll get started by grounding ourselves in the conversation and the reason why we do this work as calling like the elephant in the room as two able, non-disabled people. Why are we having this conversation about accessibility and why is it important? So I'm curious from your perspective, when you think about accessibility in live events and festivals, what are some things that you find tend to get overlooked or misunderstood?
Yeah, definitely. So when I think about accessibility, I think of event and festival inclusion. So I really think that is a foundation of welcoming your community into your event and into your festival. And that's really what most of us are trying to do with what event we're organizing. And for many of us, I think accessibility looks different. And I think sometimes we overlook how that looks differently for others and how that looks for us as well. I know it's helped myself and my community growing up, and I have seen how it can grow and evolve, and I know how it looks differently. So, for example, accessibility could be physical, it could be something that has to do with your site, for example. It could be how you're sharing information about how inclusive or accessible your event is. Something we do is an accessibility sheet. So that's very important for us of sharing with others of what the site looks like, if you'll be standing or if you'll be sitting, if you'll be outside. So just sharing that information, as well as financial accessibility. So that's something I experienced growing up. And with financial barriers, for example, there's free programming versus a ticketed programming. So understanding the value you're asking your patrons or your volunteers to give you and how that makes your program more accessible or less accessible. And then there's other ways to evaluate accessibility as well and to assess your gaps. So there's auditory accessibility, for example. Are you working in a very large EDM festival where there's a no re-entry policy? So understanding your policies as well in regards to what you're working with and the space you're working with and your industry as well, and speech as well. So for example, if there's closed captionings or if there's someone that could help communicate some of the struggles some of your patrons are dealing with. So yeah, I really think understanding that accessibility isn't just one thing that you can tackle, but it's many things that you can try to assess and try to mitigate is very important to start.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of the no reentry policy implications on if you are in a loud environment and you're not providing like a less stimulating, quiet, calm space for people to like
Yeah.
de-stress a bit, that no reentry policy would be definitely a huge barrier. That's really interesting. Can you share some like specific examples that you've either that you guys have implemented at Bluesfest and City Folk or through your different peers at other festivals that you've seen work really well?
Yeah, for sure. So I was a volunteer at Bluesfest and CityFolk before I was the manager, so that's been a pleasure of mine. And seeing what they've done with accessibility over the years has been amazing. And I've worked with nonprofits, either working on staff or volunteering with them, or also just attending their events. That's something I like to do in Ottawa. I'm born and raised here, so I love to explore the city and assist this community. So some things I've seen that we've done, or some things I've seen at other festivals and organizations, is I've mentioned the accessibility sheets. That's something we actually recently started, and we think that is huge. It's such a great thing that we've developed to prepare those who want to get involved and to let them know what's out there, what we are prepared to support them with, and to also give them that opportunity to feel comfortable in the environment they're going to be working with and decide for themselves if that's really right for them. We'll talk a little bit later about accessibility volunteers, but also another pivotal role in our organization that again has started way before me. So I'm glad to see that has continued and evolved within our organization as well as some other organizations. A free support person, that's something we do at our festival. So I mentioned financial barriers. So a free support person, that kind of addresses two things there. So having someone being able to join the paid patron, but also have someone that's there dedicated to support them and to enjoy and experience the event or the festival. Personal care attendance is huge, something Whimble has supported us with, and something we'll talk about the gap later, but it's a gap that we assessed and we needed to address, and we were able to fill that. So we were very excited to have that and to see it expand across other festivals. And then there's some other physical barriers I've seen and we've addressed as well. For example, if you have lots of stairs in your venue, ramps could be very important. We have lots of sidewalks, so we've tried to evaluate where those ramps can be placed. And if there's very large hills, I know a lot of us work in outdoor spaces or in venues that are the only options. So once you secure that venue, it's really your responsibility to then say, okay, this is the venue we've chosen and it's maybe the only option we have. How can we make this venue more accessible? Some other things we've seen are wheelchair accessible washrooms. It's something we have at Bluesfest, and it's something we've popped up in the grass in the middle of nowhere. There's organizations that supply us with those, and those are very great. But there's also accessibility washrooms, wheelchair accessible washrooms in buildings as well. So important to look for venues that have that kind of stuff. There could be non-gendered washrooms, all of those things. Washrooms is so important when thinking about your preparation for your event, and not only just enough space for a wheelchair, but also enough space for a support person to join you. That's so important to think of if you're looking for that kind of stuff. And then some other things, sensory kits, we've introduced that this year for those who may be either overstimulated or even understimulated, depending on what kind of event you're running. And sign language interpreters, I've started to see those at a lot of sports events as well, the halftime shows and stuff. I think those are very important. Some quiet and low vibration spaces. I mentioned those EDM festivals. We've seen that those festivals are becoming more accessible too. And some things that they're doing are those low vibration spaces to be able to separate yourself from the music. And sometimes people refer to it as the noise. And I know those spaces can be very important. And then some other final things I've seen, closed captioning devices. I've had the pleasure of also working at a movie theater. I've done everything in the entertainment industry, I think. And at the movie theater, we had closed captioning devices that we were able to give to anyone who requested them to be able to do that. So if you could do that in a theater space as well, if you have tiered seats and someone sitting at the back, having that closed captioning or that interpreter could support everyone from any area of the room. And then this final one I have here is programming and information delivered in different languages. So again, I always want to think about reaching different communities and making music and events more accessible, and being able to deliver that in somebody's first language is so important.
Amazing. I laugh when you mentioned the toilets because I don't think I've ever seen someone so excited about toilets as Mark Monahan, the Bluesfest founder, the time he was like, I can't wait to show you our new accessible porta potties. And I was like, yeah, go Mark. I'm
Right.
excited to see these toilets too.
It's so
But
interesting that we're going to speak about buy-in from the leadership team a little
yeah,
later.
yeah.
And I've been so blessed and so lucky that the buy-in from my leadership team, Mark Monahan, is the biggest advocate, the largest advocate for accessibility. So yeah, we've had a great time working together.
Yeah, I will never forget his like sheer joy at these toilets. They're
Yeah.
very nice toilets, I will say. And every guest that we assist at the festivals comments on them because they're, for those who haven't experienced them, they're like a elevated porta potty, like more of a trailer setup. They're well lit, they're clean, there's lots of space, there's like secure grab bars, there's accessible sinks. Like they take that experience from just the slightly wider porta potty that, like you mentioned, sometimes the care attendant can't always fit in with the individual, and just takes it up a notch. And it's such a conversation point during the festivals with everybody. It's so exciting. I guess the last question before we'll go on and talk about Mark's joy around toilets is, when you think about the guest's journey, it's not just being at the event and getting their needs met at the event. Like, how do you think about accessibility across all the phases of a guest's experience with the organization or the festival?
Yeah, definitely. So, as an event organizer, we see the events from beginning, middle to end. And I think it's important to evaluate all of those phases and how you've addressed accessibility within them. For example, preparing for your event, there's the event that happens, but almost the most important part is the preparation. So, how you plan for that. And that's where I think your accessibility really should start. And just understanding what information can I be sharing? What information could I tackle before we even start this event, before we even start looking for a venue and start sharing information? I think that is important. And then there's getting to your event. So we've partnered with Paratranspo, for example. You need to think about, is it walkable? Do we have a bike park? Something we've had over the years. So how are your volunteers and your patrons getting to your event, and how can you make that easier for them and accommodate in ways that are relevant to what you do, where you are, and what your resources are as well? That's very important. And then at your event, so once you get there, what does that look like? And what's the experience of a patron or a volunteer? And what can you assist with? And we've mentioned some things like care attendance. Something we have at our event is an accessibility platform. So an elevated platform that's wheelchair accessible, that's not too deep in the crowd. So just thinking of ways to manage your operations. And that could be something you think of, again, during the planning stage is really where this comes in. It becomes really difficult to address these things while you're at the event, as everything is going on. Many of us know the craziness of that time. So the preparation really, really gets into all of this stuff. And then there's leaving your event. So we did mention paratranspo, but egress can be so important, of crowds and how that looks like and how they're getting out, and just thinking of what that looks like. And then after your event, I think this is a stage that many maybe event organizers miss. And with after your event, so once it's all said and done and you're at home and you're decompressing, what can we evaluate and what can we assess? So, for example, I know a lot of organizations do a post-event survey, for example. So asking from your patrons and from your volunteers about what their experience was like and how they can do better and where to go next. I think it's so important to listen. There's sometimes, as event organizers, we may not be as deeply boots on the ground, as I refer to it, involved as many of our volunteers or our staff. And I think it's very important to then reach out and to say, okay, now we did it to the best of our ability. What can we do to make it better next year? And what can we address with the experiences and the stories we then hear from?
Yeah, that's amazing. I do want to just extra highlight one thing you said around the paratranspo coordination, because we've now worked at a bunch of different festivals across Ottawa and Toronto. So whether that's OC Transpo or the TTC, and Ottawa Bluesfest is the only event that we support where there's a dedicated transit supervisor at the end of the night coordinating those paratranspo pickups or wheel-trans pickups. And I don't think I think that's I don't know if that was something requested by your team or if that's something they've put in place because there's so many people waiting for pickups. But just in terms of, if we're talking about like really easy, I say it's easy, but relatively low lift things organizations can implement, there is so much stress around wheel-trans or paratranspo pickups at the end of an event. We deal with so many situations with Whimble where the bus has gone to the wrong end of the site, or they just aren't showing up and no one knows if they missed their ride or what's going on. There's so much pure stress of like people being stranded, and having that OC Transpo supervisor at the dedicated paratranspo pickup point, I think is like a huge little thing that can be done to improve the guest experience, because they are there to make sure people are getting their rides, track where the rides are if they're running late, make sure people are getting home safely. So I don't know if that's something you guys have requested or if it just happened organically or.
I'm not sure exactly. That was pre me a little
Mhm.
bit, but something we've continued and just making sure that it's a point that is accessible as well.
Yeah,
And they work with
yeah,
our volunteers. So
yeah.
it's also evolved over time as well.
Yeah. So I would say to any festival organizer, if you can work with your local transit authority to have someone there at the end of the night to make sure everybody's getting their rides home safely. Because for many people, that is the only way to get home. So if they miss that bus or that bus doesn't show up, you are quite literally stranded. So I think that's just such an easy way that people can improve that end of event going home experience. So yeah, just wanted to highlight that because from our perspective of making sure everyone gets home safely, that's a big difference that we see at Bluesfest that we've never seen anywhere else.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, talking about like maybe how this started evolving before you and what you've seen in your role, the organizational buy-in can
Yeah.
quite often be the make it or break it element of whether true inclusion and accessibility are really a priority or if it's just lip service, et cetera. So I'm curious about more the behind the scenes conversations that make all of these measures possible. So if we're thinking about an event organizer who hasn't started or hasn't gotten very far on this journey, like where is a good place to start in those conversations with leadership to make things go in a positive direction?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. So I would say starting with your mission statement. Some of us are nonprofits and we have either a mission statement, a mandate, or maybe an ethos of what we're trying to achieve in our community. And I would definitely start there, just reviewing what that looks like. Is it community focused? Is it about getting people involved and really starting there and discussing that with your leadership team, your senior leadership team who are possibly making some of these decisions for your organization? I think sitting down with them and reviewing how community focused you are and reviewing and really letting them know about some of the gaps your organization is facing can be very important to how you evolve and what your organization puts a focus in, because I mentioned many times that it's truly a foundation and it has to be in your planning. So once you're at the start, that's when you should be getting into this with your senior leadership team of this is an issue or a concern that we have and we need to address this, as we can see that there are many festivals and organizations that are, but many that aren't. So it's almost, it creates this division of inclusiveness of, okay, we're now you're falling behind at this point. And I hate to see organizations in Ottawa get to that point. I would really say starting with your mission statement, and maybe you're not even there yet. Maybe it's crafting the mission statement to include accessibility and inclusion. But some organizations may also be for profit. So if that is your mission of profit, it's a similar thing. So you want patrons to come into your event. So really thinking about that message and how can we be more inclusive to get others in is also a way to speak to your leadership team to really make that a foundation. I just want to say that word of mouth goes a long way when we speak in Ottawa about events, that we say, oh, how'd that event go? Or how is it run? And they speak about accessibility and how easy was it to get there? How easy was it to get into a bathroom? And I think that it's important to be prepared to, again, be sharing this stuff so that once that word of mouth spreads about your organization, that you can tell your senior leadership team, I'm glad we're doing this because now it's being shared within our community.
Yeah, I think too, once you start that conversation or you know who you're working with and what their priorities are, then you sometimes we also, when we're talking to organizations and coming in as external, like vendors essentially, am always like trying to gauge in the first few minutes of the conversation, like, okay, is this a carrot conversation or a stick conversation? Of is it, if fair enough, is it a for-profit enterprise that ticket sales and their bottom line is the number one priority? Great, let's talk about this as a marketing tactic and opening up a whole new market of people who aren't attending because they don't feel welcomed. Or is this part like helping address their social mission or help on their like inclusion targets or something? So there's always like some angle that resonates when we have those conversations. So I think, yeah, you always have to know who you're talking to and what their priority is. That's a great tip. In terms of, okay, so say you get buy-in, and oh, sorry, I also want to mention that was my other thought. On the stick side, there's obviously the marketing, the ticket sales, but there's also, you don't always want to go in with like direct to threatening, but there is a huge risk to organizations, a huge PR risk in not being proactive about these things. Like I heard there was a festival in Toronto this summer, and I was in my car and I was listening to the CBC, and all of a sudden it was like a 30-minute panel discussion on the festival's accessibility failures on the CBC in the middle of the day. It was like a 30-minute conversation with a bunch of stakeholders weighing in. So you don't want that. There was a festival in London where I got contacted to give a comment a couple summers ago where they had really failed on the accessibility front. So that, like, yes, you want to be positive. You want people to do these things for the right reasons, but there's also the element of there is a risk that they have to decide they're willing to accept if they're not willing to invest in this. So yeah, it's a, yeah, carrot or stick. In terms of funding, dream scenario, everybody's got unlimited funding, and that's not the barrier to implementing these measures. But unfortunately, in arts and culture these days, that's not always the case. And I feel like I hear from our partners that it is only getting worse. So budget's always just going to be like realistically a part of the conversation. So how does your team go about figuring out budget or tackling budgets for this space or this topic?
Totally. Discussing the budget line is so important, so important. And it could be a conversation of whether it's included or not. That could be your starting point. And again, this comes in that preparation phase right before you're going into your event and you're planning out everything you're going to spend money on. And with the budget line, I want to say that with accessibility and thinking forward about your event, accessibility truly creates sustainability and being able to continue your event when you're being very proactive with accessibility. And again, just that word of mouth and what your organization is doing. But in regards to your budget line, I think again, there's two ways you can go about it. There are many things that you can include in that budget line, and very valuable and important things that we've included in our budget line. Things like Whimble, for example, and some of the sensory kits, and things I've mentioned, the closed captioning devices, maybe getting a sign language interpreter, some things that you can include in your budget, but accessibility doesn't always have to have a dollar value. I think that's so important to understand. And addressing your gaps really allows you to see what you want to evaluate and what you want to change within your organization. And then saying, okay, these are all of the things we can add in our budget line, but what are the things we don't need to add in our budget line? And some things that you can do, for example, are an accessibility volunteer, for example, having someone dedicated to accessibility that is a community member, that is a volunteer that wants to be involved, that is very passionate about helping your event and your patrons. And your accessibility volunteers do not need to be personal care attendants. They could be someone that wants to help and someone that wants to really support the people in the room and support your organization too, of providing feedback and listening to your patrons about what they're experiencing. So it really doesn't have to be a dollar value. And I think evaluating what you can do and where you can go is so important.
I was just checking if shout out to Mel, the A team leader for Bluesfest, if she was on the call. Because yeah, she's that exact like definition of a really dedicated volunteer who's really moving the needle. This other topic that we haven't really discussed, had a chance to like debrief on, but I attended a sponsorships conference in Toronto last month. And there's something percolating there because the topic of the event was just talking about general festival activations for sponsors. And it really, and then, so there's that piece of what activations for sponsors can look like at a festival. And then I've also had several conversations with various different stakeholders, like whether it's tourism bureaus or individual businesses like Whimble or other organizations who are trying to find their target markets. Like, for example, in the accessibility space, or for organizations looking for new buyers or new clients in the accessibility space, that could be organizations like Whimble, other home care companies, personal injury law firms, medical supply companies. There's a whole industry of organizations who service these individuals. And I'm trying to percolate, and this is maybe something we can continue the conversation offline, but I think there is some space for activations from sponsors who want to meet this very somewhat niche audience, and there's very few ways to directly target them. So one thing I'm trying to figure out in my mind is there a way to have a personal injury law firm sponsor the festival and set up like a cool waiting lounge at the paratranspo wheel-trans pickup drop-off point where people are often left sitting out in the rain or the beating down sunshine waiting for a ride or a pickup, like ways to engage with the audience, bring in new sponsors who might not otherwise have supported the festival, and give like a better experience to the patrons, or like something to do with kind of jazzing up the accessibility platform, like just something. I think there's something there that I want to continue the conversation about, but I just wanted to raise it as a way to, if you don't have the budget line item to be able to support these initiatives, there might be some creative things we can do to bring more funding in for the festival to be able, like a dedicated accessibility sponsor to support these initiatives. So yeah, there's
Great
lots.
idea.
The dots haven't quite connected, but they're like getting closer. Okay, I'm so over time, but just I want to talk about one more thing before we move to the Q&A. So please, everybody, if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will get to those in a few minutes. But I do just want to take a few minutes to chat through what our collaboration has looked like for the past few years. And as I mentioned, like your team has been absolutely instrumental in Whimble's growth to date, and we're super appreciative of that and excited to keep building that relationship moving forward. I would love to hear, because I'm always trying to figure out how I explain Whimble to people. So I would love to hear from your perspective as like an organization who has used our services. Like, how do you describe where Whimble fits in within your plan?
Totally. Yeah, for sure. As I mentioned, Bluesfest has been running now for about 31 years. So we've been going for a long time, and accessibility has been built into the organization long before me. So coming into that, it was wonderful to expand on that. So some things that the organization was doing well before me, some things I've mentioned, like the Paratranspo and the accessibility platform and our accessibility volunteers, pivotal role for our festival. And those are our ears on the ground in terms of accessibility and now Whimble, but that collaboration has allowed us to really expand. And our accessibility volunteers are started as a group of volunteers that were able to support patrons, so festival goers that were coming to our festival, and they were working with patrons that was working well, but there was a gap that we started to notice. And not only did we start to notice it, there were some concerns that were being raised and some stories and experiences that we started to hear from our accessibility volunteers in regards to who they were working with in terms of patrons. And then it also started to involve volunteers and staff members as well. We heard that there were some more gaps that were falling through the cracks almost that we wanted to address, and to address what that gap is. So with our accessibility volunteers, they were supporting our patrons getting, once they got to the site, that's when they would start, and they would help our patrons at the accessibility platform, or they may help them if they have requests in the crowd. But they were starting to get requests that they weren't able to accommodate some things, and this is where the gap is, that we had to start turning away patrons for their accessibility needs, and that became a growing concern for us. So for example, and this is what Whimble does for us, I'll get into that a little bit, but one of those gaps were helping patrons in the drink lines. It wasn't something our volunteers were able to do at this point, and that could be festival policies, it could be insurance. That's a big thing for many of our volunteers, that they're not insured the same as personal care attendants, or they don't have the same licenses. Some of those things that we don't ask of our volunteers, and not many of us are asking. So we started to see these gaps of, okay, we can't help patrons in the drink lines, we can't help patrons before they're getting to the festival, which Whimble has helped us with, and other things like the bathrooms that was something our volunteers weren't able to help our
Mhm.
patrons with. So we decided, okay, we have this gap that we are concerned about. We're turning patrons away, we're turning volunteers away. And Whimble came to us in this shining moment of the gap filler. And we said, this was it. This is what we needed. They were filling those gaps of being able to help volunteers in the drink line, speaking to our patrons before they come to the festival. So again, that cycle, that life cycle of your event, of getting there at the event and after the event. So yeah, Wimble was doing things that we weren't able to ask our volunteers to do, and they really filled that gap for us. And yeah, we're excited to continue that.
Mhm. And I want to emphasize too, like these aren't unique gaps to your organization. Like every single festival or event we talk to, almost, I think without exception, I can't think of
Wow.
any where they've solved this problem already. Like
Yeah.
it, it's a the volunteers feel comfortable going like assisting to a certain point or are only allowed to assist to a certain point from a liability perspective. And then that's where the light touch assistance just has to end because that's the reality of
Yeah.
working with volunteers and being in that kind of situation. So that yeah, it's definitely not unique to you guys, but it was kudos to you for recognizing it sooner than a lot of other organizations have. And yeah, so that's amazing. Do you like because you're out, I'm assuming like meeting with other festivals and going to industry events, do you see this as resetting a standard for accessibility, or what's your take on the last couple, if we've moved the dial the last few years at all?
Yeah, I think it's something we've started and it's something that we now know to promote because when we go to other festivals, we see where they're at in accessibility and it's disheartening almost to see where what they've chosen to promote or again, it's resources as well. And it's something we've committed to setting that standard. I really see accessibility as a basic necessity of this is the daily life of people we're talking about and how they can move through your event and move through the Ottawa spaces or wherever you're working out of your event. This is something where we hope to see and this is why we're typically promoting Wimble of okay, this is a gap you have, we have that gap filler and if you can't attack that gap then here's where you can start. So that's where we're at right now of trying to get that word out and saying okay, this is a foundation, you're missing that pivotal piece of the foundation, it's something on the fly and just sharing that with other festivals and other events is what we need. And seeing Wimble grow within Ontario, especially, is something that we're like, okay, maybe the message is getting out there and maybe that standard is being set. And whether you're a large organization or a small organization, being able to start somewhere is important and saying, okay, we can't tackle everything that all of the festivals are doing out there, but being able to commit to something long term and to commit to any type of partnership, whether that be an accessibility volunteer, whether that be a sensory kit, whether that be Wimble, being able to commit to that long term partnership is helping and benefiting the community as a whole and anyone that you're trying to reach with your event.
Mhm. And it's, I don't personally believe it's ever going to be like okay, this is done, check the box, complete, move on. Like every event we go to, we learn something new about people's needs or new types of technologies or new types of services that are available. So I think, yeah, it's just an ongoing journey. And I think just getting people on that journey and moving along the path is so powerful. One other
Exactly.
thing I wanted to highlight too, when it comes to festival, I'm assuming sometimes pain points. Maybe you guys don't have this pain point because you have such a strong volunteer base. But if it for festivals that are struggling with volunteer recruitment or volunteer retention, like just in the past 3 summers that we've worked with your team, you have such amazing volunteers. There's pretty much every ability range along the spectrum under the sun represented in this like beautiful group of really decent human beings.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's also a piece there of if you can fully support your volunteers and make them feel welcome and included and like they can relax and enjoy their shift and look forward to this every year, I think there is also like a case to be made there of the recruitment piece and then also the retention piece of making them feel like they want to come back year after year. I don't know if you've seen that
Yeah.
reflected or.
Oh, definitely. Like inclusion is core to our program, and it's not only for our patrons, it's for our
Mhm.
volunteers. And again, addressing those barriers and making sure that there isn't a financial barrier to being a
Mhm.
volunteer with us and trying to eliminate those physical barriers. That's where we start. And we again, addressing those gaps is how we make our program more inclusive. And that's what I would suggest to everyone. And with our accessibility team, as you've mentioned, there's volunteers with different abilities as well. So being able to go up to the accessibility team and seeing someone that, maybe is very much like you or struggling
Mhm.
with the same things as you and
Mhm.
shares your experiences can be
Mhm.
very important. And those are the kind of people, volunteers, staff you want to engage as well within your organization. If it's not something you're comfortable with, you have knowledge about, just engaging someone else with that passion and saying, hey, we need help in any capacity. If you can just be involved and be able
Mhm.
to be around so that we can lean on you for advice or support
Mhm.
or listening to experiences and
Yeah.
offering us those suggestions so that we can then take those back and
Mhm.
see what we can do next.
Yeah. Yeah. So if anyone's struggling with volunteer recruitment, I feel like Keanna's literally like keeping like beating people away at the door, whatever the term is. So it definitely that reflected in the community of the volunteers that we see every summer on a regular basis, and their passion about what they're doing. Okay, I'm just checking if we've got, okay, please, again, everyone, please pop your questions in the Q&A or in the chat. Just one more question for you before we move to the Q&A. Like, I'm just looking at what we've talked about so much already, because I do want to talk about moving forward in the future and what organizations should do next. Are there any, we've talked about the mission statement, we've talked about the leadership buy-in. Is there one like foundational piece that you'd recommend organizers think about or work on from day one of this journey?
Yeah. So I would say it really is a journey and it's so important to stay relevant and true to whatever you're working with, whatever industry you're in and whatever resources you have as well. I mentioned a lot of assessing your gaps. So for us, we were at a certain point and there was a certain point we wanted to get to. So knowing those two is, I think, a start for every organization of thinking, okay, we have a mission statement. Our first step is done, but we don't have any accessibility support, accessibility volunteers, no budget line. Maybe that's your starting point. And then maybe you do have that. And maybe you're going on to the next step. Maybe you have all of that and you're thinking, okay, now we have the budget, we have the patrons, we don't have a group of support workers. That's your next step. So I really think there's, for all of us, even for Bluesfest, there's still that next level. And I really think that starting with where you are and where you want to go can be important. And if you don't know what that is, there are others in the community that help that. There are accessibility consultants that we've interacted with and that we've met through Whimble that they've shared with us their other resources that allow us to say, okay, they have all of this information to share with us. Now we can see where we need to be because we're not that subject matter expert. And now we have that. Evaluating your resources can be very important, whether that be financially in your budget line or your human resources. Do you have that volunteer? Do you have that champion staff member? Where are you right now? And what can you grow to be?
Amazing. Shout out to Wimble's free accessible events guide of does your event pass the vibe check, not just check the box or whatever our cheesy tagline was in the end. But yeah,
Love
check
that.
it out on our website if anyone's looking to start at that beginning point, and then find and hire and pay consultants with lived experience to take you along the journey. Thank you so much for doing this, Keanna. I really appreciate your time and you sharing your expertise. Thank you so much.
Thank you.